What is going on, guys? So lately there's been a lot of propaganda, especially a lot of media outlets lying about Islam. And you know what? It's time to expose these media propagandas, whether it's mainstream media, which they've been caught lying multiple times, or alternative media, which again, just like mainstream media, they also have an agenda and they're all spewing out talking points. If you look at some of the alternative media channels, they're really similar. They're spewing the same propaganda. It's the same crap, just different asses. And you guys know what I'm talking about. There's a bunch of shells on the alternative media, like Alex Jones. I'm not gonna name the rest. They just mimic what Alex Jones does. But anyway, Mark Twain said, "If you do not read the newspapers, you're uninformed." And then he went on to say, if you read the newspaper, you're misinformed. And actually, and there's an exception to this rule. Fox News viewers are less informed on world events than those who do not watch any news. Just think about that. There was an actual study, and this was proven, and we see Fox News lying multiple times. In this video, I'm going to show you guys Fox News lying, and then on top of that, I'm going to post some video clips of how it's a propaganda tool, and that's all it is. And just think about every time there's a war, the Zionists, specifically Israel, are murdering people in Palestine and in other places. Malcolm X said this quote, and it's still true today: the media has the power to make the oppressed look like the oppressors, and the oppressors look like the oppressed. Reflect upon that, and remember, always side with the oppressed, never the oppressors, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, gender, etc. Think about this, and now I'm going to expose to you guys Fox News in this video clip. Peace.
Fox so-called news has been caught playing fast and loose with the facts again.
A new survey from Fairleigh Dickinson University has found viewers of Fox News are less informed about world events than people who don't watch any news. The study found viewers of Fox are 18 points less likely to know that Egyptians overthrew their government, 6 points less likely to know that Syrians have not yet overthrown their government compared to those who watch no news. Fairleigh Dickinson political science professor Dan Cassino said, quote, "The results show us that there is something about watching Fox News that leads people to do worse on these questions than those who don't watch any news at all."
Absolutely. And speaking of stage events that help shape people's perceptions, let's open up the mailbag. And we'll take this question from David. The day after 9/11, our servile Western media outlets continually showed Palestinian people dancing and rejoicing in the streets as if they were celebrating the events that took place that horrible day. Was that footage taken completely out of context? It seemed to me as if our media was trying to frame a specific narrative in order to show how barbaric and criminal the Palestinians can be, thus giving the Israeli army all the more reason to continue the ethnic cleansing.
Right. Yes. Yes. The short answer is yes, the footage had nothing to do with Palestinians celebrating 9/11. We can get a couple of handles on this, one from History Commons. The excellent History Commons has this entry on that specifically. Television news coverage on 9/11 repeatedly shows images of Palestinians rejoicing over the 9/11 attack. According to Mark Crispin Miller, a professor of media studies at New York University who investigated the issue, the footage was filmed during the funeral of 9 people killed the day before by Israeli authorities. He said to show it without explaining the background and to show it over and over again is to make propaganda for the war machine and is irresponsible. So that's one part of that footage that they were showing over and over and over. The other part was, well, we can pick this up again. There's an excellent overview article that I'll link to in the show notes that has a lot of different links. One of the links is to a book called The Fraud of the Fraud. Have you been taken for a ride? And that book notes Annette Kruger-Spitta of ARD, German Public Broadcasting TV magazine Panorama, stated that inspection of the unreleased complete tape of that footage shows the street around the celebration was quiet, and a man in a white t-shirt is noticeable for inciting the children and is fetching new people again and again. The woman who is remembered for her cheering, whose name is Noel Abdel Fattah, later stated she was offered cake if she celebrated on camera. At the time, she was unaware of the 9/11 attacks and said she was frightened when she saw the pictures on television of how she was being portrayed to the world. And then that book goes on to reproduce a Spiegel article, which I haven't checked. I think it's available still online, but if it is, I'll throw it in the show notes. Anyway, it's reproduced in that book that's talking about that ARD investigation in more detail. And the other part of this is there was, at the same time as this was being debated, there was a canard thrown out by some Brazilian researcher who said, no, this is footage that was taken 10 years ago. They were saying it was taken in 91. But that timeline didn't add up, and some people said no, it was 1990, and other people were saying no, it was 1993. That is a blind alley. No, this was not taken in the 1990s. It was from around that time, but it had nothing to do with the celebration of 9/11. And that's again, yeah, it's a perfect example of how media manipulation gets people ready for war. And that's another example of how 9/11, war on terror, war in the Middle East all go together in this big package. And 9/11 truth is the well, I don't know what's the best metaphor. It's the bow that if we unwrap, the whole present comes out, which is the present of the truth, which unlocks all of the propaganda and crap that's been built around this for so long.
Perhaps those so-called Palestinians were hired by the Extra Mile casting agency.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Here's a clip from their roundtable show, The Five, where they were showing one of my videos and then talking about it, something that they've done a couple different times over the last few years. And just listen to this.
History was not my subject. I slept through that class.
Name two of the founding fathers of the United States.
Oh man, you had to start there, huh?
What year was the Declaration of Independence signed?
God. Come on, man.
Hold on, you don't give it away.
Off the top of my head, I don't know.
Yeah.
A tiny tip to those in that video this weekend, you may want to put down the suntan lotion and pick up a book instead.
I'm like, Jesse Waters should sue. He's got an impersonator.
Polo shirt,
even at the polo shirt,
Yeah.
almost up. I think these are jumping the shark. Just leave it, let Jesse do it.
But by the way, yeah, he's not as good as Jesse. That was very disappointing.
It was interesting. It was.
Then why aren't you showing Jesse Waters' videos on your dumb show instead of mine, Gargoyle? Cuckfeld called me a Jesse Waters impersonator. Thankfully, many of you who have my back bombarded the show on Twitter and Facebook, causing Cuckfeld to then issue an apology at the end of the show. Kind of a half-hearted apology. Listen to this.
Number two, people on Twitter are saying, wait, Mark Deese has been doing this, or Deese has been doing these Q&As for a while. So, hey, I just didn't know.
It hasn't been for just a while. It's been many, many years. And it's pronounced Dice, you douche. I've been doing these man on the street interviews for many, many years, inspired by my childhood hero, Jay Leno.
Factor follow-up segment tonight. Earlier this week, Jesse Waters traveled to Dearborn, Michigan, where the population is about 50% Arab, most of them Muslims. Waters did what he always does. He interviewed folks.
Do you wear a burqa ever?
No. Our religious beliefs, we do not have to cover our face.
Well, thank God, because you have a very beautiful face. What do you do for a living?
Middle East financial services.
Financial services?
Yeah, send money overseas or receive money.
Oh, it sounds suspicious. What do you think about all the Muslims here in Dearborn?
They're bad. They're not friendly. They don't speak to you.
Do you miss the desert? It's pretty cold here.
But now the Muslim advocacy group CARE, angry with Waters and me. Joining us from Southfield, Michigan, Dawood Walid from the CARE organization. So what's the beef, Mr. Walid?
Well, the show that you had, Bill, just really shows old, tired, and really bigoted frameworks about the community here in Michigan and Dearborn in particular. And there were of factual errors that were in the story. For instance, the mentioning that the police chief was a Muslim, when in fact Chief Ron Haddad is a Lebanese Christian.
But that was corrected, though. I corrected that fairly quickly.
Okay, but then also was misinformation put out saying that there was a Muslim woman who was killed simply for having condoms. That never happened. There was no honor killing or anyone getting stoned to death in Dearborn. That hasn't happened, and there are no honor killings taking place.
Okay, and I think those are legitimate points that should have been clarified by Waters and weren't. So I will cede that those things should have had clarification. There was a condom killing in Germany, and Waters didn't say that. That was said by some guy who didn't know what he was talking about. However, have you ever seen Waters' World before?
I've only seen it about one or two times.
All right. How would you describe it?
Well, how I describe it is it goes into particular communities, and in some ways it makes fun of people or communities, but also it reinforces or plays into stereotypes that people have about certain communities.
But wouldn't you say it was satire and pretty much good-natured satire?
I don't think it really was satire, especially when you have people making comments about honor killings, and then you go on your Facebook page, Bill, and it's not your fault, but because of that story, people are talking about bomb Dearborn, nuke them.
That was literally comments on the Facebook page. Every story we do, there are crazy people that react in nutty ways. But your beef is primarily that we ran you down, and I'm submitting to you that Every Waters World is a satire and is a Q&A in a very genial way between Waters. There was no malice in that report. And then you had a beef with me. What's your beef with me? What did I do?
Well, it's your show, Bill. Not necessarily this one, but not necessarily Mr. Waters, but you are the head of this show, and you allowed that to go on. And at the end of the day, the Dearborn community is systematically mischaracterized. There are people who, and we have all types of nuts that come into Dearborn, and these types of depictions just give nuts more fuel to come into Dearborn based upon false stereotypes.
Do you feel that Muslims, whether they be in Dearborn or anywhere else, can be made fun of?
Sure. We have sense of humor, sure.
Good. All right. Because the week before, did you see who Waters made fun of the week before?
I sure didn't.
Okay. Catholics, because the Pope was here. It was the same kind of thing. We got a few crank letters from people going, you're denigrating Catholics, but people understand that this is done in a satirical way, and that's why I think you're overreacting. However, your points about honor killings and stonings and things like that, that's my fault as an editor. I probably, I should have said, you know what, if we can't back this up, and believe me, I'm glad you contacted us because it won't happen again, that if there's any kind of accusation of violence or something like that, we'll check it out. If it doesn't check, we'll cut it. But overall, it was a gentle piece, and you know it was gentle. Why are you so upset?
I mean, I don't see this totally being gentle, and if I can just give a little background, and you played the part about the guy missing the desert. Well, I actually know 3 of the people in the story. One of the individuals, actually, Mr. Silva, owns or part owner of a restaurant. He's from Lebanon. He's not from
Wait, the guy in the desert. The guy with the desert. Where is he from?
He's Lebanese, and there's no desert there.
I think that guy said he was from Yemen.
Well,
what's Yemen?
Well,
it's the desert.
All of Yemen is not the desert. But even the issue about the drone, Bill, as far as there's a war going on right now in Yemen, and there's drones and there's people being bombed.
I think you got to lighten up a little bit, Mr. Waleed. But as I said, you taught us a good lesson. If we're going to throw out honor killings or we're going to throw out stonings in a largely satirical piece, we can't do that unless we have the facts. And I appreciate you bringing that to our attention, Mr. Waleed. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity, Bill, and please come to Dearborn and come join us one day, and we can go.
All right, we'll get some good food.
It's not an aberration. We're going to show this to you one more time. Okay, none of what you're about to see is a repeat. These were all individual times they said this. This is what Fox News does professionally. They are professional liars. Now, you just saw that I got this proven. Listen to how many times they referenced it.
No-go zones. No-go zones. So there are no-go zones. No-go zones.
No-go zones.
No-go zone means...
The no-go zone.
No-go zones. 750 no-go zones.
The no-go zones.
No-go zones.
No-go zones. No-go zones.
No-go zones.
No-go zones.
Will there be no-go zones here? Are they there now? No-go zones.
We keep talking about the no-go zones in France here.
Are these no-go zones? They live in the no-go zones. The no-go neighborhoods and no-go zone. No-go zones.
No-go zones.
No-go zones.
The no-go zones.
No-go zones.
These 751 no-go areas.
No-go zones. No-go zones.
No-go zones. No-go zone. You have no-go zones.
A no-go zone. These are no-go zones. In these no-go zones, no-go zones, no-go zones, no-go zones is no-go zones. The no-go zones, the no-go zones, no more no-go zones.
No-go zones. I think they've reached critical mass, frankly. And I've said this before. I think Europe is finished.
I'm looking forward to the report from Le Petit Journal on whether Europe is actually finished. This is what we got to deal with every day, man. That was just over the span of a couple of days they did that. You think they're done? They're not done. They're talking about no-go zones right now. They're not embarrassed by any of this. This is what they do for a living. It's amazing the mountain of misinformation that they put out. And here in America, they're treated seriously, like they're a real news channel. By the way, if you don't know why, it's because a lot of people in television news look forward to working at Fox News one day, or they already work there. So when you get a paycheck from those guys, all of a sudden you say, well, of course they're doing news. How dare you say that? The reality is, of course, that Fox News is a no-go zone for real news.
A correction now. Over the course of this last week, we have made some regrettable errors on air regarding the Muslim population in Europe, particularly with regard to England and France. Now, this applies especially to discussions of so-called no-go zones, areas where non-Muslims allegedly aren't allowed in and police supposedly won't go. To be clear, there is no formal designation of these zones in either country and no credible information to support the assertion there are specific areas in these countries that exclude individuals based solely on their religion. There are certainly areas of high crime in Europe, as there are in the United States and other countries, where police and visitors enter with caution. We deeply regret the errors and apologize to any and all who may have taken offense, including the people of France and England.
So no credible information, but that did not stop them on almost all of their programs from running it all week long.
There's one thing Fox News is good at. It is national security. That's because they have great analysts like Wayne Simmons. Now, this guy's an expert. He has ties to the CIA. In fact, he's been on Fox News countless times as, quote, a terrorism analyst. So it's obviously what he is. And he's got strong opinions. He says that waterboarding is not torture and it should never be called torture, but he knows because he's an expert. He's got ties to the CIA. He also knows that President Obama doesn't know anything about national security, even though he's the commander-in-chief. He says President Obama is a novice since he has no experience with any of these national security interests. That's why he's such a big, great analyst for Fox News. It makes sense. He's the expert. He said he's had a long career, decades, working with the CIA on something called Outside Paramilitary Special Operations Officer. Ooh, that does sound pretty good. It turns out he was so outside that it didn't actually exist. He has no ties to the CIA. He was lying all throughout, and now he's been arrested. He's facing 3 charges, making false statements to the government, major fraud, and wire fraud. To add to that, he has a significant criminal history, including convictions for a crime of violence and firearms offenses. You think Fox News cares if you're an actual analyst? If you actually have information on the matter you're talking about? No, the only qualification you actually need is to hate Obama and liberals enough. So, oh, well, you're an outside paramilitary special operations officer, are you? And you hate Obama? Perfect, come on in. Call Obama a novice. He doesn't know anything, right? You know everything. So here's a Fox News analyst on his way to jail where he'll find out about real security issues.
Let's get reaction now from Ray McGovern, who is a real former CIA agent. You're welcome back to the program. How do you think someone like Wayne Simmons managed to get on air so often without anyone properly checking his background, do you think?
Well, you know, I'm glad to have something a little lighter to discuss here. We in the intelligence community made a habit of vetting our sources. Apparently, Fox News does not do that. And apparently, the military contractors that have paid this fellow lots of money don't do that either. You know, yesterday when I heard about this, I was struck by 2 coincidences. He claimed to have had 27 years of experience as a CIA officer. I thought maybe he was impersonating me, because that's exactly how many years I spent with the CIA. And then all of a sudden, yesterday, mid-noon, about noon, I got a call from Fox News. It was one of Sean Hannity's producers. Her name was Fran. And she said, would you come on to talk about the news conference that you participated in earlier in the day? And I said, well, sure. And then she asked me a whole bunch of questions. So she was vetting me. And in the end, she said, well, Mr. McGovern, we just can't squeeze you into our program. So my question was, how come you could squeeze in a false 27-year-old veteran of the CIA, but you couldn't squeeze me in to talk about real issues? I think I know what the answer is.
So he got vetted, but you got vetted, excuse me. He did not. Simmons was also indicted for advising senior military personnel overseas. It gets worse. How is that even possible for the CIA to fool the CIA in such a way?
Well, you know, I was thinking this through. I imagine he said, I was under such cover that they're going to disown me. So if you ask the CIA if I really worked there, no, they're going to say, no, never heard of him, never heard of him. That's how secret my mission was, you know. I mean, gullibility, I've never seen it at this depth, not only in the news business, but in the vetting of people who sometimes have access to rather sensitive circles, sensitive secrets. So I'm not surprised, sadly, but I am really amazed at the coincidences here. There are a couple of us, lots of us, that have bona fide experience in the CIA. None of us who speak truth to power are ever invited. Oh, sometimes we get invited, but once we're vetted, we never appear on Hannity because Fox can't find room to squeeze us in.
Another aspect of this is that prosecutors claim Simmons even had a significant criminal past. Wouldn't CIA contractors or staff be thoroughly back-checked?
Well, they would be, and I think the only sensible explanation is that he went by some kind of assumed name, or he simply said, well, look, you know, you're going to get the false information because I was so deep cover that that my legend actually included derogatory information. So there are all kinds of ways to skin this cat. The amazing thing is that he was able to insinuate himself into making lots of money from defense contractors, as well as onto Fox News, saying all the kinds of things that Hannity would like him to say, whereas people like us, well, we have to wait in the wings, and we don't get onto Fox News.
Ray McGovern, a genuine former CIA agent. Thank you for coming on to RT International this hour.
Last night during my discussion with James Carville about the Martin Luther King commemoration, I said there were no Republican speakers invited. Wrong. It was wrong. Some Republicans were asked to speak. They declined, and that was a mistake. They should have spoken. Now, the mistake, entirely on me. I simply assumed that since all the speakers were liberal Democrats, Republicans were excluded. So here's the tip of the day. Always check out the facts before you make a definitive statement. And when you make a mistake, admit it. By the way, I'm sorry I made that mistake. It's very annoying because I know you guys watch The Factor.
Down to 22%.
Not the number I just gave.
Well, your number is wrong.
No,
your number is wrong.
Take it up with the National Institutes of Health, all right?
Look,
They're the one that put it out.
I am a council member on the National Institute of Health. Your number is wrong. I'm telling you it's 22%.
Well, this is an interesting book. Now, I want to clarify, you're a Muslim, so why did you write a book about the founder of Christianity?
Well, to be clear, I am a scholar of religions with 4 degrees, including one in the New Testament and fluency in Biblical Greek, who has been studying the origins of Christianity for 2 decades, who also just happens to be a Muslim. So it's not that I'm just some Muslim writing about Jesus. I am an expert with a PhD in the history of religions. But I have been obsessed with Jesus.
Though, it still begs the question, why would you be interested in the founder of Christianity?
Because it's my job as an academic. I am a professor of religion, including the New Testament. That's what I do for a living, actually.
I want to see a Republican Party that rather than trying to make it more difficult to vote and restricting the number of days and hours you can vote, a Republican Party that says, we want everybody to vote and we're going to give you a reason to vote for us.
All right, but I don't know if asking for an ID
is trying to restrict the vote, I mean, I'm sorry. You should be able to prove who you are before you cast a ballot.
No, you should be able to prove who you are when you register to vote. And when you make the proper registration, identify yourself, you shouldn't have to go to some higher level, which is going to restrict some.
Fraud is committed. And I mean, Boston and Chicago, you register and then you show up and it's not you.
I have not seen any study that says fraud is a problem of such significance that
in more than 30 years. How do you call that hype?
How many security contractors died in Iraq, do you know?
I don't.
No, nobody does, because nobody cared. We know that several hundred died, but there was never an official count done of security contractors dead in Iraq. So when I see this focus on what was essentially a small firefight, I think, number one, I've covered a lot of firefights. It's impossible to figure out what happens in them sometimes. And second, I think that the emphasis on Benghazi has been extremely political, partly because Fox was operating as a wing of the Republican Party.
All right. Tom Ricks, thanks very much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
That last interview was like the shortest interview in American history. It was like less than a minute. The second this guy kept it 100% real and said, "You're so concerned about Benghazi. What about the 18 embassy attacks under the Bush administration? I didn't hear you mention a peep about those under him." All right, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Okay, you too. It's fantastic.
Your detractors believe that you did not tell the world it was a terror attack because your campaign didn't want that out.
Bill, think about it.
That's what they believe.
And they believe it because folks like you are telling them that.
I'm not telling them that. I'm asking you whether you were told it was a terror attack.
And what I'm saying is that is inaccurate.
New information today, Hillary Clinton asking her donors to keep the cash for her next run in 2012. Some say this could cost her any shot she had left at the VP slot on the Obama ticket. Let's ask the former Clinton advisor Howard Wolfson, who joins us now from D.C. What do you make of that, Howard?
Nope.
Howard, you don't hear us all right? You having a little audio trouble? Looks like you. Oh, you do hear us now. I was just asking. All right, good enough. We're going to, so this idea that Senator Clinton is asking supporters to keep the money until 2012, that gives you the idea she wants to run for president again. Is that the wrong signal to be sending right now?
Well, actually, the committee that she's sending up, that she's asking people to contribute to, is a Senate committee, not a presidential committee. Her Senate re-election is up in 2012, and she's asking people who contributed to the general election portion of the presidential run in 2008 to generously redesignate those funds so they can be used for her Senate committee in 2012. So this is not a presidential committee, it's a Senate committee. One has nothing to do with the other, and as we have already seen and as we will continue to see, Senator Clinton is going to be enthusiastically traveling the country, raising money and holding events for Senator Obama in 2008.
As bad as that was, it really was just par for the course for Fox. That's because Fox isn't actually a news network. It's a propaganda outlet for the billionaires like Rupert Murdoch and the Republican Party they own. It's the culmination of a plan current Fox chairman Roger Ailes hatched when he was working in the Nixon White House in 1970. We know about this plan because of a memo unearthed by investigative reporter John Cook. In that memo, Ailes talks about creating something called GOP TV that would broadcast Republican talking points straight into households all over the country, all under the guise of providing news. The plan was rejected by the Nixon administration because they couldn't come up with the funding for it. But decades later, billionaire Rupert Murdoch granted Roger Ailes his wish, and Fox So-Called News was born. Today, thanks to fact-free propaganda like yesterday's story about an ISIS link to the Chattanooga shooting, as much as 60% of the statements made on Fox are mostly or entirely false. Not surprisingly, Fox viewers are some of the most misinformed news consumers in our nation. And on domestic issues, they're actually less informed than people who watch no news at all. Yes, people who watch Fox know less about domestic politics than people who don't watch any news at all. So isn't it time for Fox So-Called News to drop the word news from their name?
There's a saying of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Well, there should be a special new saying for Fox News, a fox in sheep's clothing. But anyway, it's not just Fox News that lies or spews out propaganda. There's CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, Russia Today, Press TV. So again, Russia Today spews out Russian propaganda, Press TV spews out Iranian propaganda, and a lot of the media just spews out Zionist propaganda. And then you have alternative media filled with control opposition, shells, specifically Zionist shells, but other shells too. And you have right-wing evangelical Christian channels, which again spew out lies and propaganda, and theirs is just blatantly obvious if anyone does some research. And on top of that, like I said, the alternative media is filled with liars and stuff. Just like mainstream media, alternative media spews out propaganda and lies also. But I want you guys to reflect upon this, and let's just look at a quick history lesson. Look up Operation Mockingbird. For those of you that don't know what that is the CIA was spewing out propaganda through the media and paying the media to do it back in the days. And then recently you had Obama sign the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, which legalized propaganda, but they're using propaganda before, they're still using it, and they will be using it in the future. But I want you guys to reflect upon this. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this content, and I might do more videos about other news channels and stations in the future. The reason I did this is because there's a lot of lies going out in the media, and it's just been disgusting, and especially they like to lie about Islam. So I'm just going to start exposing their lies for what it is. Peace.